John Oliver just released another video or segment that has been turned into a video on nuclear waste. Now, here's the deal. I think John Oliver is very funny. I think the segment actually has a lot of funny bits. But John Oliver, I will say this, and we'll get to why he is entirely wrong on nuclear power. As a matter of fact, it's not going nearly as viral as others because most people know that he has no idea as to what he's talking about. But he's gotten so lazy. It's become a formula, and it's easy to pick out where we don't even necessarily have to rebut, a 20-minute segment, because about 65% of it is anecdotal fear-mongering. So he does the same thing here. What he does is he presents a problem, okay? Then he talks about how terrible the problem is, and he ignores the fact that Democrats have created the problem and Republicans tried to fix it for a long time. Then he ignores any solutions, and then he ends with restating how terrible the problem is without offering any solutions. That's the segment. So he does it this time in a way that he believes to be very effective, working on it for weeks, he says, with nuclear energy. Let's roll the first clip.
Nuclear waste, the radioactive and toxic byproducts from making nuclear energy and weapons, is a serious health hazard.
Except it's not. Nuclear power generates less waste than coal, which Oliver's also against. Oil, gas, surprisingly, even less than solar and wind, with solar waste panels creating 300 times the toxic waste per unit of energy that a nuclear power plant would be producing if you compare them. Yeah, so you can say, this is again, they just take statements that are not contextual. They remove the context, say it's a health hazard. Well, at that point, you can say that Cheez-Its are a health hazard because there was a recall in 1975.
Hopper disagrees.
It's not nearly the same health hazard as botulism. Well, maybe there could be botulism on Cheez-Its. I don't know. Let's go to the next clip.
1 out of 3 Americans live within 50 miles of high-level nuclear waste, some of which, like plutonium, is lethally dangerous and will be around for an incredibly long time.
Plutonium-239, for example, has a half-life of about 24,000 years.
It's true, 24,000 years, and that just scratches the surface. It takes 10 half-lives for plutonium to become harmless. So that's 240,000 years.
Wait, is that Al Jazeera?
It is Al Jazeera.
All right, interesting he should use this point, / also Al Jazeera for his fear-mongering. Solar energy, okay, though more expensive and less efficient than nuclear, creates substances which, unlike radioactive isotopes, have actually an infinite half-life. At that point, we're kind of splitting hairs. Infinite half-life, thousands of years, I get it. But coal ash itself carries into the surrounding environment, I quote, 100 times more radiation than a nuclear power plant producing the same amount of energy. Wow. So you can just say something is bad. We get it. We get it. Nobody wants nuclear waste in their backyard. But when you remove the context, you don't actually help anybody. This isn't productive. At a certain point, you're just fear-mongering because that's what you do. Let's continue with that. Clip 3.
Almost half a century after nuclear power was harnessed, there still is no agreement on where to store the waste.
It has been 27 years since that clip, and our country still doesn't have a nuclear toilet. And that is our subject tonight. Why do we not have a nuclear toilet?
Oh, I'll tell you exactly why we don't have a nuclear toilet. Because you don't want one. People like you, for the same political expediency, Obama shut down Yucca Mountain and set back our nuclear waste, our repository, by potentially 20 years. Okay, so this is why do we not have it? Do we want to look at the policy? Democrats have repeatedly halted reprocessing of nuclear waste too. We'll get to that in France. They are light years beyond us in their nuclear capabilities, certainly what they're using. So let's look. 1977, Jimmy Carter banned nuclear reprocessing. Ronald Reagan lifted the ban in 1981. 1993, Clinton discouraged the nuclear industry from reprocessing in a policy statement. 2001, George W. Bush called for companies to develop reprocessing technologies in his national energy policy. And then, of course, Obama came in and he screwed the pooch once more, setting it back. So, John, here let's do this. Let's do this exercise. Let's say that everything I tell you in this rebuttal is true, and people who agree with John Oliver, okay? Let's say you check these sources, they're not Al Jazeera, and you agree with the scientists that nuclear power is, I know you have to check them, and I encourage you to watch this whole clip, people out there watching his whole segment, his whole show, and I encourage you to check the sources that we list. By the way, you can just actually type them in. They're not necessarily in the description box. Sorry. Oh, I have to type it in?
So hard.
Did you ever use a bibliography? My God, the nightmare that is a library for you. So check the sources. Let's assume you agree with the sources, the scientists that say nuclear power is renewable, it's reliable, it's cost efficient and safe. Would you allow us to open a new repository? I didn't think so. And that's the point. The rest of this segment is purely fear. Well, before we get to that, here's something I thought was pretty interesting about
We've been researching this story for a couple of weeks now.
Really? Because you can watch the rest of the clip, you can watch the rest of the video, and it's entirely fear-mongering, so this is the condensed version. I encourage you to watch the whole thing.
Over the years, we have dumped nuclear waste all over the country, and in many places, there have been frightening leaks. Take the Savannah River site in South Carolina.
There are radioactive alligators on the site.
Yeah, radioactive alligators. And it's not just reptiles who've been impacted by nuclear waste.
I got on Facebook in order to reconnect with people from high school, and we all immediately started noticing that so many of us were sick. We had all of those cancers, every single one.
Hanford site in Washington state. There have been so many issues that they've achieved a dubious honor.
The most contaminated place in the entire Western Hemisphere, right here in Washington state.
Cancer, radiation, alligators.
That one scares the hell out
That's
of
the
me.
whole segment. Not gonna lie, if I saw a radioactive alligator, I would be pretty terrified.
Done.
Make that a spider, and I will be the first person to buy a private ticket to the moon. So this is what John Oliver does. He sets up the video with a few out-of-context references, so it seems as though his sources are solid. Then he uses anecdotes to fearmonger, which is exactly what the left has done, by the way, specifically to shut down legislation that would create the nuclear waste facilities or help us with reprocessing solutions in the first place, and then they never offer any solutions. So here are the facts of nuclear energy. Again, I encourage you to check these sources out. It's reliable. To give you an example, the U.S. Navy has logged over 5,400 reactor years of completely accident-free operations with nuclear submarines. For the same reason, by the way, that France garners 75% of its energy from nuclear power. And it's so reliable and so inexpensive that Germany's failed solar and wind energy programs, which we covered in depth, they're forced to import energy from France. When people try to point, they have one success story they tried to point to. Germany. Yeah. They ended up having energy surpluses. They would sell at a net negative prices, and then they would have energy droughts. By the way, their emissions went.
France.
Yes. Their emissions went up in Germany because they had the solar, wind. How do you think they create these farms, these plants? It requires an unbelievable amount of energy. It creates an unbelievable amount of toxic metals, and it still didn't work. So they had to import France's nuclear power, where it hasn't been politicized yet, and they have technology like reprocessing. Okay, it's reliable. It's safe. So the actual mortality rates, this is where context matters from nuclear energy, are so low, it's even hard to find a graph to compare it with other energies for scale. Can we bring up the graph that we do have? There you go. So see, it's hard. You've got to do some, that's nuclear way down there.
Look in on it.
And people will say, well, that graph is skewed. It is skewed because they had to find a way to fit coal and even solar on the same graph as nuclear. So the mortality rate, I think for solar alone, yeah, it's over 4,000 times higher per kilowatt produced. So it's safer, it's more reliable, it's incredibly clean, solar power. When I saw this video, I was surprised. I said, well, John Oliver must have nothing else to go after, because even if you look at this, a lot of people are saying, do you really know anything about nuclear energy? I don't know how many ways to say this. Plain and simple, nuclear is cleaner than coal, gas, creates a fraction of the waste, even solar and wind farms. It's not even close. I don't know how many more ways to say it, but here's the thing, none of this matters. And this is my problem with the neo-environmentalist climate alarmists. So the leftists oppose nuclear for the same reason that they have all actively opposed supposedly green energy, like solar in the Mojave Desert. Yep, that was stopped by the left. Hydropower, that's what we used where I was from in Quebec, because of endangered species, and they don't want to, I don't know, interfere with the environment. It's not contaminating it. And yes, even sometimes wind power, as you see with the Kennedys and their summer homes. It's a moving target that they never intend to hit, because they don't want us to use any energy at all. Ban coal, let's ban coal. Okay, use solar. Okay, let's install these panels. No! All right, so what do we do now? Let's ban fracking. Okay, let's use hydronuclear. No! The fact is that you can't point to an energy resource the left consistently supports at all. There's not one that they've consistently supported across the board, and certainly not one that works. And as always, John Oliver, he doesn't offer us any solutions. I'm looking through his notes here. John Oliver's in his utopia. Okay, let's present this. The United States would use no coal, no gas, no hydro, no fracking, and no nuclear energy. And of course, disarm Americans while exposing them to the dangers of open, unprotected borders. John Oliver, good luck with that. Yeah, that was rougher than necessary. But hey, that's what he wants. He specifically requested that utopia. Hey, if you like this video, subscribe by clicking the subscribe button. It's in a circle now. It used to be a square, which most buttons aren't squares. Unless it's on a phone. There's square buttons on phones, but most buttons are circles. You understand what I'm talking about. Or watch the recommended video, which is popping up in a box, or subscribe at louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub. Join the Mug Club so you can get the daily show, and that means that you are not beholden to the YouTube censoring overlords. But let's be honest, You like being there where you are, under their thumb. Power bottom you.